Places are desperate for CRNAs. I get, texts, emails, phone calls. The place that I took a PRN locum position, I can be PRN and locum because that's how badly they need me. They'll take whatever they can get, whenever they can get it. They're happy to have help. They had people retire. A lot of CRNAs are retiring in the next 2 to 3 years. So this is a good time to go become a CRNA. The job market is really hot right now, and they can't usually find enough staff. I'm Jenny Finnell, CRNA and founder of CRNA School Prep Academy. I have always had a passion for helping those who aspire to become a CRNA. A couple of years ago, I started mentoring a handful of prospective students. Fast forward to today, and I have a successful mentoring program that has impacted hundreds of aspiring and now current nurse anesthesia students. What I enjoy the most in my business is connecting with you, the future CRNA. I love learning and growing with you. The road to CRNA is full of unique challenges, and no two journeys are the same. But every journey has a learning opportunity. I'm here to share what I have learned over the years from not just my students, but CRNA community leaders, program faculty, and from my time as a practicing CRNA. This will be your one-stop shop to get the mentoring you need to not only guide you into this career path, but support you all the way through to graduation day. So if you're a nursing student who's exploring the possibility, an ICU nurse actively pursuing CRNA, or a current nurse anesthesia student, you're in the right place. Tune in for inspiration and actionable takeaways that will help you from start to finish. Let's get started. What is your day going to look like as a CRNA? In today's episode, we're going to break down what a day in the life of a CRNA looks like from the time you arrive on your shift, from the time you get to go home. So let's go ahead and get into today's show. And welcome back to CRNA School Prep Academy podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Finnell, CRNA, and today we're going to break down the day in the life of a CRNA and essentially what does it look like from start to finish, from the time you actually park in the parking lot all the way to the time you go home. What I would love to kind of start off this episode by saying is that every shift's going to look a little different, and sometimes your days are going to also equally look different, meaning depending on what cases you're doing, the type of anesthetic you're going to be doing could change, the type of patient population can change. And so that's one of the perks and one of the things I love about this career is the fact that it keeps you on your toes, I guess is a good way of putting it. And also there are some days where you plan out what you think you're going to do, and then last minute something changes or gets canceled or adds on, then your day completely changes. So let's go ahead and start with, when does your workday start? So most of you are working as ICU nurses or just nurses in general. And so you're very accustomed to 12-hour shifts. You're very accustomed to working 7 to 7. So as a CRNA, what I also love about this profession is, at least this was my experience, and I'm speaking from my experience, but as an ICU nurse, I was relatively limited on the type of schedule I could have. I couldn't go to straight days because I had to have probably like 6 or 7 years of seniority to ever qualify to work straight days. So my options were 2 things, straight nights or day-night rotation, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. I did the 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off for probably about a year of my ICU experience, and I hated it. I was miserable. I literally thought I had a thyroid issue. I thought I was anemic. I was like, what is going on? I'm just miserable. I feel terrible and tired all the time. Had a bunch of blood work done, only for them to be like, oh, you're normal. I'm like, oh, well, this is what it's like working night shift and rotating back and forth all the time. My body is just totally screwed up. So that was my experience, and at that time, I decided, well, I make a little bit more to work nights, so I might as well go to straight nights. And if I'm going to be miserable, whether I'm day-night rotation or straight nights, I might as well make a little bit more money and be miserable too. So I decided to make more money and remain miserable. So that's kind of what I ventured on to. I went to straight nights. And honestly, I kind of liked nights also because it was a little more chill environment. There wasn't as many people in and out. It just seemed a little more laid back. And I know a lot of you probably can relate to that. Don't get me wrong, stuff could still go crazy. And in fact, on nights, you actually had less resources available to you. So that could be more challenging, right? But I enjoyed it. I really liked the night shift crew. So that's what I did. So that being said, as a CRNA, I just felt like even from day one, even from the time I was a new grad, I had the option of what shift I wanted to work. I could do 8s, I could do 10s, I could do 12s. And then you don't start off typically doing 16s and 24s as a new grad, but within 6 months I did. So relatively quickly after I started, I got trained to do open hearts, and then I started doing 16 and 24-hour shifts. So that's also an option. Now, if you like straight nights and that's how you work well, I will warn you that there's not probably a whole lot of places, none that I even know of, that allow you to do straight nights, because you just don't do surgeries full staff all night long. I do work at a facility now where CRNAs do a 7P to 7A shift. That is like a standard shift that you could take. That's optional, obviously, if that's what you want. And I also think that they maybe rotate people through that, so they're not always stuck doing that. But that being said, I mean, I wouldn't say that it's like one CRNA, right? It's not like they have multiple CRNAs who are all doing night shift. So just know that if that's your jam, if that's your thing, you may have a harder time finding a hospital who offers that type of a shift. Again, I've worked at 3 different places and now work at a 4th place as a locum, and they don't have in-house call. They have like at-home call at the smaller place I work at, which is it's not even a designated trauma center. So I mean, it's not usually, they don't usually do a whole lot during the night, so they don't need to be on call. But when I worked at like the level 1 trauma centers, I mean, sometimes, I mean, stuff comes in and it's like, you know, sometimes you have crazy nights where you're like barely scraping by with the staff you have to get everything done. Same thing with like weekends. Sometimes weekends were crazy when you're like, this is a Saturday. Why are we booking these cases on a Saturday? This can wait. And yeah, so sometimes it didn't happen. And I mean, you were running almost a full schedule on a Saturday. So, at least with the staff you had, I mean, you were just room to room to room to room all day long. So that being said, it just varies for shift work as far as what you want. But that being said, I think the flexibility as a CRNA to do more days and to have an option between 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, I think is nice. The other option I had at one of my other places of employment is they allowed CRNAs to do two 13s and a 14, which got them their 40 hours in just 3 days a week, versus you could still do 12s and do 36, but when you do 36, you take a pay cut, right? Because that's four less hours a week that you're working. So it does seem like a decent pay cut when you graduate to being a $100 an hour provider. 4 hours a week does add up in your paycheck. So keep that in mind. I've never found a place that will pay you for 40 when you work 36, but if that exists, let me know. But ultimately, I would start my day, say at 6:30 is usually when I can plan 6:30, 6:45. Let's just be realistic here. I mean, I'm not usually arriving anymore at 6:30, but like when I was new or when I was a student, yeah, 6:30 is usually when you are in the changing room or in the locker room. But now I'm usually rolling in the parking lot at 6:45 and I'm going in the building and getting dressed. So I'm actually in the OR by 7 a.m. I don't have to clock in. Some places might have you clock in as a CRNA. I've never had to do that. Now, that being said, when you don't clock in like that, I'll take that back. When I first started, I think we did clock in at my first job, but then they did away with that, which was actually kind of nice. The only thing about clocking out is if you were to stay over, you have to track that time. So one of my places of employment, you didn't have to clock in and out, but if you were to stay over, you had to keep track of that and fill out a timesheet. So that way, if you went over 4 hours of overtime in a pay period, you would get paid that out. But you only got paid out if you went over 4 hours in a pay period. Meaning in a 2-week period, if you worked 5 hours, you get paid for those 5 hours. But if you, in a 2-week period, if you only worked 3 hours over your typical set 80 hours in that pay period, you wouldn't get paid out those 3 hours, which was kind of crummy, actually. I didn't really like that because, I'm sure that happened way more than, they probably got a lot of free hours. But it also equally kind of panned out where some weeks maybe I'd get an hour too early. So usually in a 2-week period, it usually equaled out. So it wasn't a huge deal, but just know that every place may be a little different. So again, 6:30 I would say is on average when you can expect to kind of start your day. So typically that means, for me anyways, with my commute of 20 minutes, which is not bad, I'm usually leaving my driveway at like 6:20, sometimes 6:27, sometimes 6:30 when I'm like, woo, I gotta really run. But usually like 6:15 to 6:20-ish in the morning, I'm leaving my parking lot to get to work. I'm getting up at like, this is all going to look different for everyone, but I'm getting up at like 5 or 5:20. Where I work, that's an hour drive away. I'm getting up at 4:20 in the morning so I can leave my parking lot by 5:15 in the morning so I can get there at 6:15 because they start their ORs at 6:30. So know that, again, depending on where you work, maybe ORs start more like 7 a.m. versus 7:30. The other places I have worked, ORs typically start at 7:30 is when the first case would go back in the OR. On occasion, a surgeon would request a 7 o'clock start, but that was not very common. And if that was the case, you would know the night before and you have to plan for that to get there early. Where I work, that's the 1099, the more rural, smaller hospital. They routinely start cases at 7 a.m., meaning getting there at 6:30 is like getting to the other hospital at 7. You have a half hour to essentially get your room ready, pre-op your patient, and get ready to go. So I am in that parking lot at 6:15 in the morning versus 6:45 in the morning. I'd be late. So keep that in mind. Depending on where you work, they may start their ORs a little bit earlier than others. But again, typically you have about a half hour in the morning to go to your room, set things up, look up your patient, figure out what kind of anesthetic you're going to provide, any kind of equipment you need. You draw up your drugs, you check your vent, you check to make sure your computer's working. And again, you go say hi to the patient and you assess their airway, you ask them questions, you make sure they're NPO, drug allergies, all the things, and make sure that they're ready to go. And then obviously wait for them to see the attending. If that's where you're working at, if you're working with an attending anesthesiologist, wait for them to see the surgeon. Now, that being said, there are places who, depending on what your practice is like, you may be pre-upping your own patient, signing off on that and taking them back to the OR. You may not need an attending to sign off. You may be able to pre-up your own patient and go back to the OR. It just depends on your practice model and where you work. And if you want to listen to an entire episode about that, I do have an entire episode on comparing, contrasting the differences between, opt-out states, supervision model, direct supervision or direct model of practice. So go back and listen to that episode. But like I said, you always take responsibility for assessing and pre-oping your own patient. I also work at a children's hospital. They typically don't have tons of people going to the room and assessing a child because it's going to create more anxiety for the child. So we do rely pretty heavily on the attendings to mostly do the pre-op, and we speak to them about any issues that we need to know about. It was different for me coming from an adult hospital where I always saw my patient, regardless of who else has seen them. I always try to lay eyes on them if I had time. But I've essentially gotten very accustomed and trusting, what the attending is telling me is going to be happening for the case. And it works out fine. The other place I worked was a supervision model that I tried my best to get over and pre-op them because oftentimes, we didn't have as much interaction with the attending. And so, if I wasn't really laying a solid pair of eyes and doing a good thorough pre-op, sometimes I feel like things got missed or I had things that I needed to get addressed that didn't get addressed, that kind of thing. So sometimes I'd be doing my airway assessments as they're rolling them down the hallway. And that was again, I wasn't a fan, but that's how sometimes things roll. So again, depending on where you work, the speed and the pace can be different. When I worked at the surgery center, it was very, very fast pace. You didn't have an anesthesia tech, so you were turning over your own machine, taking out your own trash, stocking up your supplies. So when I got there in the morning, not only did I have to get my room ready, draw out my drugs, go see the patient, do the pre-op, all the other things, all the equipment, but I had to also equally make sure my room was stocked for the day. And then intermittently throughout the day, I'd have to grab extra supplies. So it just depends. Where I work now, we have amazing anesthesia techs who pretty much spoil us. They'll do the machine check even. Some places won't have the techs do the machine check, but they'll at least put new tubing and wipe down your stuff for you in between cases. So that can just vary. But like I said, typically in the morning I get there at 6:30 in the operating room by 7 o'clock, maybe have some coffee, go to my room, 7:05, by 7:15-ish, 7:20, I'm for the most part ready to go in my room. I have 10 more minutes, so I go see my patient, I talk to the attending, I do any last minute checks as far as do I have the right equipment, et cetera, et cetera. Then depending on where you work too, you may either go over to pre-op with the nurse to grab the patient, or you may just be able to wait in the room and have the nurses bring the patient back to the OR and get started. Again, it just depends on where you work, what the routine is. Where I rotate as a 1099, we are expected to go get the patient with the OR nurse. So we leave the operating room, go get the patient, and come back to the OR with the patient. Other places I had worked, it wasn't as common to do that. And so you would essentially get to hang out in the operating room until they brought the patient back. Now, be cognizant. So, if you're taking an ICU patient who has a giant bed that's hard to push, even if it's not the expectation, you go and you help the poor nurse push this giant bed down the hallway. So again, sometimes even if it wasn't the expectation, I go do it because I want to be a good human and help out my OR nurse, right? So that being said, even though I'm telling you guys a typical routine, it just depends. things. So if you're going to get the patient, depending again on the case, you could give some pre-medication like midazolam, Versed, to kind of help them relax a little bit, to hitting the road. One of the CRNAs I actually trained with as a student called it roadies. I don't know. I'm not, I don't know what else that could mean, but he called it roadies, like for the road, roadies. I have a feeling he used it for other things too when he was, a young college buff. But that being said, you can give him pre-medication. Be cognizant. Like I've rotated in my time as a student through practices who would routinely push Versed and fentanyl. I don't routinely do that because, man, you don't know how fentanyl is going to interact with a patient sometimes, and especially when you're giving it in addition with Versed. I've seen patients go, they slow down enough to where they get hypoxic pretty quickly when you're giving both fentanyl and Versed boluses at once. So if I give any roadies, I usually just stick with Versed only. And even like I spoke to in kids, I don't typically see the kid prior. Sometimes I do. Sometimes if the kid's anxious, if they go to the pre-holding area, if they're inpatient, for example, I'll go see the kid and give Versed prior to going back to the OR. If they're not inpatient and they don't already have an IV, well, then the attending can prescribe midazolam oral that they can drink, which half the time I think they spit out all over their gown. But sometimes it works if they take it orally, but they have to make sure they do that in enough time because you don't have an IV. And so they come back to the OR and you're doing a mask induction and starting the IV after they're asleep, right? So it just depends on the type of anesthetic, the type of case you're doing, as far as how involved you are in going back to the OR. But in the adult world, again, I get my room ready, drop my drugs to the best that I knew was going to be expected. I'd go to pre-op, I would see the patient, I would read through the chart. And then sometimes if you have computer charting, you can actually read through the chart prior to going to pre-op, but I also equally would grab the physical chart and see if there's any additional things, like check for their blood band, if they need a type and cross kind of thing. And then I would do my own assessment. I would do my head to toe assessment. I'd ask them questions. I'd see if they have questions. Of course, I'd introduce myself and make them feel more at ease. I'd also be judging and sensing how anxious are they, and are they in baseline pain? Those two things are really important. If they're already in baseline pain, well, that's a good indication that you have to be ready to give them something either, sooner rather than later. I mean, I'd be planning on giving them some fentanyl prior to moving over to the bed, that kind of thing. And also asking them what helps their pain, what's their home regimen, because it gives you a good indication on like what their requirements are going to be for you back in the OR. But then anxiety too. If they're really crawling out of their skin, they're anxious, well, make sure you have some Versed on hand. There are some times where I don't give Versed. If they don't need it, if they're really chill, especially if they're older than like 60 years old, 65. I mean, you can have really spry 70-year-olds, right? So just because they're 70 doesn't mean I don't give them Versed. But I use my judgment. If they're spry, which means very like lively and just, very good shape, I'd still give it if they were anxious. But if they're very fragile and maybe they have kidney disease or something like that, and they don't need it if they're not anxious, I don't give it. I don't always give Versed. It's not a given that I give it. So again, as I kind of am alluding to, is when you're starting your day, you're equally planning for what drugs you need to give, what you would avoid, what are some nuances of the case, with the patient's history, with what the surgeon's going to require. When I go to pre-op and assess my patient and touch base with my attending, now I may or may not be able to physically see my attending, meaning he might be already pre-oping someone else, he might be in the OR already. So sometimes I'm calling him if I have a question, saying, hey, just touching base. Other times I have questions that I'm going to run through in my head that when I do see him come into the OR, I ask then. It just depends on the importance, right? If it's really important, I make sure I touch base with him sooner than later. If it's more like little piddly things like extubation plan or post-op plan or whatever, I know I can ask him back in the room, but I make mental note of it. Usually you can find your attending in the morning somewhere circulating the hallways. So I do try to touch base with them, whether again, that's physically or on a phone call. But also the surgeon. I like seeing the surgeon in the morning, and that way if I do have questions, I can ask it right then up front. Otherwise, I do the same thing. If it's urgent, I ask. I find a way to find the surgeon and ask. If it's like not as urgent, I can wait back to the OR, but I make a mental note to ask them. And the OR nurses too, I like to touch base with them. I don't necessarily always have questions for them, but sometimes I do. And so, you kind of take a team approach when you're starting your day, and you kind of, ease into your day by making sure you're communicating. Communication is really key in anesthesia. So that's kind of how your day gets started. And so depending on where you work, you're either rolling back into the OR at 7 a.m. or 7:30 a.m. Some cases don't start till 8 or 8:30 a.m. So if you have an 8 o'clock start and that's your first case of the day, well, then you're taking your own morning break, right? You're getting your own break. You're giving yourself a check, a dot, whatever so typically you'll keep track of who's getting breaks throughout the day. You'll have a CRNA who's designated to giving breaks, the free CRNA who could be taken at any moment for an add-on. And then you have no one free to give breaks. Sometimes that does happen too. But typically you're keeping track in some shape or form of have you had a break. That's a morning break, lunch break, afternoon break if you're past 3 p.m. Know that the only mandated break by law is a lunch break. Know that morning break and afternoon break are actually not mandated. I didn't know that actually until recently. I'm like, oh, because they don't technically have to give you a morning break or afternoon break, but they do have to give you a lunch break, or you technically should bill them for that lunch break that you never got to take. Just FYI. So anyways, because most places subtract your lunch break out of your pay, in case you didn't know that. I went completely oblivious thinking I got paid for my lunch break, and I'm like, oh, actually, I don't get paid for my lunch break. I don't know why. It never occurred to me. Anyways, I digress. So again, if you have a 8 o'clock start, 8:30 start, then you're giving yourself your own break. Sometimes you're giving someone else a break. Like I said, that morning break is only 15 minutes. So if you have an 8:30 start, you're ready to go, you've done your break, go give another couple breaks to your other coworkers who had a 7:30 start. You can come in the room at 7:45, 7:50 and give them a break and still have probably 10, 15 minutes before your case comes back. So that's like the nice, peer-to-peer, just help out when you can. But at the very minimum, it's always nice when you give yourself your own break. It really lessens the burden on the free person who's trying to give a lot of breaks. And trust me, from being the CRNA who was a free person a lot at my first position, it is hard to go around to every room and give breaks all day. Not only is it kind of like you're thrown into a situation that you like just mentally weren't prepared for sometimes. You're like, oh, this is like crazy chaotic mess in here. And here I have to give you a lunch break. But sometimes it just happens. But it's very tiresome, to just give breaks all day. So when someone took their own break, or even if it was like just a 15-minute, 10-minute break, it was always just like, thank you for not just sitting in the break room for 10 minutes and then still also demanding a separate 15-minute break. So remember that when you graduate and you're a CRNA, if you got 10 minutes, take your break and give yourself a check. Take one, that's what I do. I think that really helps versus, okay, I only have 10 minutes. So I'll just sit here and I won't eat my breakfast, but I'll just sit here and then expect someone to come get me out of my room when we're already short staffed. I mean, that's kind of the way I think anyways. All right. So if you start your first case at 7:30, depends. Your case could be half hour, could be 20 minutes, could be 10 minutes. There could be just a knee manipulation that's literally 5 minutes and you're done. It takes them longer to go to sleep and wake up than it does to do the actual procedure. Where you can go into a case at 7:30 and it could be a 6-hour case, right? Or an 8-hour case. It could be it could be the only case you do all day. So again, it just depends on what your lineup is for your cases for the day as far as what your rest of your day is going to look like. There could also equally be a lineup of cases, and then you could have some cancellations, but then they could shift and move things into your room to kind of help the flow of the day go better for the rest of the staff. So things can change pretty abruptly, pretty quickly. But yeah, I mean, pretty much from there, when you're done, when you're waking up a case, you're waking them up, you're extubating them. If as long as you're not going to the ICU intubated, you're extubating them, you're taking them over to PACU, you're giving them report. And then depending, again, how quick your room turnover is, you will either have time to run to the pre-op to see your next patient, or if it's really quick and you barely have time, like I said, you may be pre-oping them as they're rolling down the hallway because you haven't even made it back to your room yet. But you ultimately have to make sure you're ready to go for the next case, usually before you're actually done with your previous case. So like I often get drugs drawn up for the next case, make sure I have an airway, make sure I have the equipment I need, even before I'm even done with my first case. Doesn't always work out beautifully like that. If it's really quick and you're all hands on deck, like a knee manip, where you're pretty much just masking or, getting them really deep, and your hands are busy the whole time. You don't even have time to chart, let alone get ready for the next case, right? But in those situations, I can plan for it and I get ready before even starting my day for the second case. I mean, if I know my first case, there's going to be no time to chart, no time to get ready for the next case, I will then take the extra 5 minutes in the morning and get ready for my next case before I even do my first case. And so that way you can be more quick and efficient after you're done with that really busy case and go right into the next case. So you just kind of have to plan for your day as best as you're able. Again, it doesn't always work out pristine, but there's been cases where or times where I've had to tell the OR they need to give me 5 minutes. I'll come back in the room and maybe I got stuck over in PACU because my patient started having emergence delirium. I'm giving Precedex and more pain medication or whatever it is. And I'm tied up in PACU attending to the last patient for 5-10 minutes, and I just close out my chart. They're already turned over, ready to go to the next patient, but I haven't got anything ready because it was a busy case. I have to say I need 5 minutes because I haven't had time. They have to honor that. They can bring the patient back, but I'm not going to be ready. So they're either going to get charged OR time, which is quite expensive, and they're going to sit on the cart and wait, or on the bed and wait for me to get ready. Or you can give me 5 minutes and let me turn over my room and get drugs drawn up, and then I can say, go get the patient. So when they do get to the room, I give my full-blown attention to the patient versus trying to get everything clean and ready to go. So know that ultimately the pace of the OR really falls on you a lot. Not always, but it can. And equally so, you may deal with some disgruntled looks by the surgeon who's like, keep the pace, but again, safety. So always about safety. If it's not safe, it's not safe. And you have to take your time to do what's right by the patient, right? You have to. If you don't have drugs drawn up, you don't have drugs drawn up. You do what you can. And for the most part, most of them understand. I haven't had a terrible experience with that, to be honest with you, overall. There are certain situations where, maybe they do give me a little bit of gruff for speed at times, but other times I can pick up the pace and they can tell I can keep up. But then oppositely, if the patient demands my attention afterwards, I'm going to give my all to my patient. And if it means at the expense of starting the next case on time, then so be it. I mean, my patient's my patient, and I will never leave their side if they're not okay. So if I'm tied up in PACU, it's for a good reason. And I think most of them understand that. But also be quick to know that you can call your attending to the bedside in PACU. Be conscious of that as well, and use your judgment of when that's necessary and not necessary. If the patient's critical, then you just don't leave it side. But and also too, like in the PACU, if you have drugs readily available, like fentanyl, Precedex, whatever it is, sometimes especially I work with kids, sometimes kids can get crazy. Adults can too, but emergence deliriums are a real thing. And they could be risking pulling out IVs and harming themselves and harming the nurses. And so it's important that you chill them out. You have drugs you can push, the nurses don't, right? They're kind of at the mercy of what their order set is. That kind of thing. And you can titrate a lot safer and quicker than they can. So if I have to give propofol and PACU, I do. It just depends. And, I typically like Precedex more than that. But if I have to give, 10, 15, 20 milligrams of propofol to try to prevent someone from ripping out their IV, that is what I do. And again, the nurses can't push propofol. So I tend to the patient as needed. I don't just say, oh, I'll call the attending over here to take care of it. Bye. No, I don't do that. So again, depending on what's going on, the speed of the day really kind of is set with you. But then, like I said, after I give report, I typically like to first go back to my room, make sure I'm good to go, and drop off my narcs if I have drugs to waste or whatever it is. But then at that point, as long as I'm ready to go for the next case, now, and if you have an anesthesia tech who's turning over your machine, you can go to pre-op and see your next patient, do your airway assessment head to toe, read through their chart, that kind of thing. But if you don't have an anesthesia tech, now you have to wipe off your machine, put new tubing on. And again, if you hadn't gotten stuff ready for the next case, you got to get your tube, your blade, your oral airway, your drugs, your labels, look at them up, read through their history. So that's why you can save yourself a lot of time if you're doing this prior to even ending your previous case. So depending on that situation, you may be stuck in your room the whole time just getting ready for the next case. And then the OR nurse could be ready to go get the patient, and you may be you didn't make it to pre-op. And that's okay. Sometimes that happens as long as you have what you need from the electronic chart and kind of have a good game plan as far as what you're doing. You don't have to always go see your patient, although you should always strive for it, right? I'm just being realistic with you guys of what you're gonna see and what you're gonna see. In a beautiful, perfect world, of course, you get to pre-op and see your next patient, and I always strive to do that. But there are just some times where it's not in my, is it worth me slowing down the OR to go do that? No. And if anything, what I would do is I'd grab my roadies and I'd head over there with the nurse. And as the nurse is doing her own checks, I would do my quick assessment and help them bring them back to the OR. So that's what I would do. If I really knew I wanted to see the patient, but I didn't have the time, as long as I was ready in the room, I would head over there with the nurse to get the patient. Now, if there's can I go get the patient and you're still busy trying to get stuff ready and drawing up drugs, you would say, okay, we'll walk slow, right? So as they're going to take at least 5-6 minutes to go get the patient. So you'll have those 5 minutes to finish getting ready. You still have to make sure you're ready. And if that's the case, you won't get to pre-op the patient. But when they come into the room, you can do your airway assessment. You can ask them pertinent questions. If you should have already reviewed their electronic chart, as long as you have electronic charting. Or at that time, you would also review their paper chart, right? Where I used to work, there was all paper charting. And so there'd be times where I didn't have time to pre-op my own patient and they come back to the room and I'd be looking through their labs because I'm doing a spinal and I want to know what their platelets are. And no one reported off to me. Like I didn't have anyone call me and say, hey, Jenny, this is the pre-op on this patient. It was kind of like I had to take a minute or two when they rolled in the room to look through their chart, to review their allergies, to do the airway assessment, to look at their labs. And so sometimes you just have to do what you can with the time you are allotted, but always make sure you do it. If that's back in the OR, it's back in the OR. So that's kind of how the flow can go and how it can kind of change and differentiate. And there's other times where the turnover is so slow, like in a robot room, those are usually longer turnovers where they're taking down a Da Vinci, which is the robot that does the surgery. Well, technically the surgeon does the surgery, but the robot's what's docked, right? And kind of with the trocars and stuff like that. Those rooms can take longer. Sometimes you have time to just take a really nice long break or give a break, right? To give a break to a coworker who didn't get a morning break because your turnover is going to be slow, so you have 15 minutes. Or there would be times where if it's during a lunchtime, I would just take my lunch during that time. That way I could check myself off again. So lunch, can happen as early as 10:30 and as late as never. So I've been offered a lunch break at 10:30 before because the day is so busy and the break CRNA knows that in order to get all the lunches done, they have to at least start offering lunches at 10:30. And when I know I'm the 8-hour person and I'm first out, which means that maybe you're leaving at 2 o'clock that day or sooner, I'll take my lunch at 10:30. I may not be that hungry, but I'll eat something, even if it's just a snack, knowing that maybe in between cases I can grab another snacks. That's fine with me. And so again, you do have to be flexible. Again, remember you're working as a team where typically when someone's giving a break or the break person, they're looking at, okay, this staff member's working till 7 p.m. I'm going to probably hit them closer to the end because if they take lunch at 11 o'clock, they're going to be hungry by 3 o'clock. And they may not get another break till 5 p.m., right? So they may not get their lunch till 1 o'clock or even maybe 2 o'clock because they're a later staffed person. But really, lunch breaks depend on where you work. Sometimes they're pretty predictable as far as you usually always get one. Other times they're not. Other times it's 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock before you actually get a break. And it may just be you end your shift and you take your lunch before you leave. And like I said, some places, if you don't get a lunch break, then technically that's billable hours that you should make sure you're getting paid for. How often is that done? I don't know. It just depends on where you work. Like where I work as a locum, I legit track my hours. So I would get paid if I never took my lunch. But if I was a true W-2 CRNA and you're not clocking in and out, or even if you are clocking in and out, you would have to make you'd have to fill out a separate timesheet that showed that you should get paid for that lunch that you never got. So you have to take some initiative and make sure you're doing that and speaking up for yourself if that's routinely happening to you. Now, luckily, I will say in my 8 years of being a CRNA, I would say in 1 month time, like you might get a lunch break late, like a couple times. Like it's not frequent, you guys. It's maybe once or twice a month at most. Some places could be more, like once a week though. I mean, it just depends on how poorly staffed you are. Every place is hurting for staff. Nurses are not immune. CRNAs are the same. Places are desperate for CRNAs. I get texts, emails, phone calls. The place that I took a PRN locum position, I can be PRN and locum because that's how badly they need me. They'll take whatever they can get, whenever they can get it. They're happy to have help. They had people retire. A lot of CRNAs are retiring in the next 2 to 3 years. So this is a good time to go become a CRNA. The job market is really hot right now and they can't usually find enough staff. So that being said, depending on the staffing, your breaks may or may not be super great. One of the hardest times in my career, and it's always been hard, I've had 3 kids now, but returning to work after you have a baby and you're pumping or you're trying to maintain somewhat of a pumping schedule, it's incredibly hard and it's incredibly stressful. So Men listening to this, please take some pity on your fellow women coworkers, that are childbearing age. Check on them, like offer them extra breaks. They need it. They need to feed their baby. Okay. So like that was always been a really stressful part of being a working woman, is like, I'm also a mom, and my obligation and what I want to do is I want to feed my children in the way that I know is the healthiest, it's the best. And it's not always possible. And I think fed is best 100%. And we've used formula on all of our kids, but I always try. Right. And so, sometimes when your breaks are unpredictable, it can add to your stress, and essentially you can get kind of bitter. You're just like, I hate work. You know what I mean? It's like my boobs hurt. I had a coworker who just had twins, and we had a really busy day where I mean, and this is from a place of routinely you always get breaks. So it's very rare. And I mean, I've worked there for almost 2 years, and I think there's only been like 2 days like this in the 2-year period. So very rare. It's a wonderful place to work, but she didn't get a break, and she just had twins. She was like, Jenny, if you knew how painful my boobs were, I was literally almost in tears. And so, I can't even imagine. It just hurts. And not to mention, TMI, but like you can leak everywhere. And how embarrassing is that to have a wet shirt? And you're like, it's because no one's getting me out so I can go to drain these suckers. So anyways, I don't know, I totally side tangent, but more power to you, working moms. I think, women are amazing. The fact that we're able to juggle all of that, and over again too. So anyways, yeah, so that's kind of the breaks being a CRNA. Depending on where you work, it's better than others. But typically you get a morning break, lunch break, an afternoon break if you're working past 3 p.m. If you're working till 3 p.m., your lunch break's the last break. And don't get me wrong, CRNAs notoriously use the time in between cases to grab a bite to eat, to take a break. Like I spoke to, depending on your room turnover. Even if you've had multiple breaks, you just keep taking more. If you have the time and turnover, why not? That part's kind of nice. I mean, you could technically have like 5 or 6 built-in breaks throughout your day if your room turnover is really slow. You could have an extra 5 minutes, but routinely I'm using that time to go to the bathroom, get a drink of water. Sometimes I'll go and I'll grab and shove a cheese stick in my mouth and go back to the OR. Sometimes I'm taking some chocolate in my pocket, and I'm putting them underneath my face mask during the case, or even gum. I've eaten in the OR. Shh, don't tell anyone. I've also drank in the OR. Shh, don't tell anyone. But I have routinely seen it done. Obviously I probably shouldn't advertise that, but if you're stuck in a really long case, you're not going to get out, I'm going to drink some water. I'm not going to be dehydrated. Typically what I do is I'm behind the drapes, no one can see me, right? But I'll turn my head, and I'll put it underneath my mask and take a swig and put it back in my bag. Now that being said, some places don't allow you to bring bags in the OR, but then at that point I'll hide my water bottle in my vent, in one of my drawers in my vent, or in the bottom of my Bluebell, for example. But again, I usually, if I know I'm going to be in a room all day and breaks are scarce and that's just the way the place operates, I bring my water and I bring some snacks. Maybe not like Cheez-Its or anything like that, but I'll bring like candy or suckers, or there's been times where I've grabbed little, like I do grab little, those like little circle cheese things, and I'll bring a cheese back to the OR. And as long as it goes to your mouth quickly, it's not like you're taking out your mask and eating a whole meal back there. Not like, but it's more just like snack stuff. So, anyways, just being realistic with you guys as far as what actually happens back in the OR. So that's that. So let's see, we're to lunchtime at this point. You've done a few cases. You may or may not have had your lunch. And really, like I said, at any time during the day in your 8-hour day, your assignment can change, your cases can change, but you kind of just keep doing the same thing as far as, you induce, you go to sleep, you maintain the anesthetic, you wake them up, you drop off and PACU or the ICU, give report, set up your room, go to pre-op, induction, maintenance, emergence, report, PACU, pre-op. I'm getting starting to get tongue-tied here, and then do the same thing over and over again. It's like a just giant circle. However, every situation is going to be unique. Every case is going to be different, or they may be the same. You may just have a lineup of AV fistulas all day long, but I guarantee every patient's going to be slightly different. Some patients may have a pacemaker and may need a magnet put on them. It just depends. So at that point, whether you're an 8 o'clock person, typically you can get relief anytime between 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. I know that's a wide range. I did a whole episode on some of the cons of being a CRNA, and one of the cons of being a CRNA, I'll just tell you, is kind of an unpredictable end of shift. depending on where you work. Now, I have worked at places that it's very predictable. I like never get stuck, which I love, right? I like a predictable end of shift. I mean, I feel like if I work 8 hours, I'm supposed to be there for 8 hours, I just get to go at 3 or 3:30. But sometimes you're at the mercy of how they run the OR schedule, meaning if they run it long, then you're going to be stuck. Or if they run it wide, you're going to be stuck, meaning the 8-hour people may routinely get stuck till 4:30 because they just want to get cases done. But then they slow way down, and then the 5:30s get to go home early because they've run the schedule wide all day. It just depends. How many add-ons happen during the day. If you're a level 1 trauma center, a lot of add-ons typically, it's usually like right around 1, 2 o'clock. It's like add-on city, 1, 2 o'clock. You're like, no, I was going to get out on time and now I'm going to be stuck. Dang it. You'd always see CRNAs hovering around the board to see what, and another thing too, if you're an 8-hour person, they usually assign you an order out. So you're not always stuck last out. So if there's 5 8-hour CRNAs, you'd be ordered 1 through 5, and the 5th CRNA, that's 8 hours, would be last out, which means out of all the 8-hour CRNAs, they'd be the last one to leave. So on a good day, the last one to leave still leaves at 3:30. On a bad day, that last one to leave gets stuck till 4:30, maybe 5 o'clock. So that stinks, right? So that's why it's nice not always be last out, because then maybe the next day you'd be first out, and then maybe you're leaving at 2 o'clock or 1 o'clock, to make up for being kind of stuck late. So that's also how the order out works. And they do that with every shift, meaning 8-hour, 10-hour, 12-hour, 16-hour. Although when I did 16s, there's only one other 16. So it was like between me and one other person. 24 hours is 24 hours. You typically get to leave at 7 a.m., 7:30 technically, but a lot of them peace out at 7 a.m. when they see another CRNA come in the building who's taking 24-hour call. They give a quick report and then they're gone. A lot of times it's before 7:30 or whatnot. But really, you're not leaving early on a 24-hour shift. You're not going to get out at 6 a.m. or 6:30 a.m. You're the soonest you can leave as a 24-hour is 7 a.m. So, you come in at 7 a.m. or whatever time you get in there in the morning, and you leave at 7 a.m. the next day. Where if you are another shift, like a 10-hour shift, 8-hour shift, you could leave as early as, if you're 8 hours, you could leave as early as 1 p.m. If you're 10 hours, you could leave as early as 3 p.m. After all the 8s are gone, right? Then the 10 hours get to go home. And if there's nothing to do for the 10 hours, maybe they'd stick around till like 4, right? To just make sure there's no add-ons, but then maybe they get to go home at 4. So that's kind of how the shift leaving order, the pecking order goes, as maybe you can call it. And it's nice, it's flexible. And again, there'd be days where, say I have an appointment at 4 o'clock and I knew I had to be out at 3:30. If I was last out that day, and I knew the schedule didn't look like it would allow me to get out on time, I would trade with my coworker. I'd say, pretty please, I love you, I'll repay you, I'll scratch your back. What do you want? Massage, foot massage? No, not a foot massage. But you can usually help your coworkers out and trade. And so what you would do is you would be first out, they'd be last out. But then when when the roles are reversed, when they're last out and you're first out, you would trade with them again. So you would kind of repay the favor as best as you could. I mean, sometimes I feel like it didn't work out very well. We're like, hey, I didn't really get a favor back. But, again, you help out where you can as your coworkers, because again, a lot of us, especially women who are pregnant, who have OB appointments, I mean, some of these appointments, like the last appointment's 4 o'clock and you're racing across town to get to your appointment. So you do what you can to help each other out. But yeah, that kind of explains the shift work. And when I go home at the end of the day, I'm usually fried to a crisp. No, just kidding. Actually, depending on the day, I mean, if the day's really busy, I usually do get home and I'm usually exhausted. I'm just being honest with you guys. It's usually just a lot. I mean, you're mentally engaged the entire time as you work as a CRNA. So it can be very mentally exhausting. But other days, not so much. Other days are pretty laid back and it's like you go home and you're like, cool, I'm going to go work out. I'm going to go to the grocery store. I often did those things anyways because you kind of have to maintain normal life. But yeah, if I got out at 3 o'clock or maybe early 2 o'clock, cool. Now I have time to go to the gym. Maybe I wasn't planning on going to the gym, but now that I have an extra hour and the kids don't need picked up till 3, I have an hour to take mommy time, or maybe that was going to the grocery store. So depending on when you get out, again, if you get out early, it's kind of like a nice little bonus. If you get out late, well, then it kind of stinks and you're coming home kind of disgruntled and then you're going to bed and getting up and do it again the next day. And you're like, I better get out early tomorrow. But yeah, I hope that gave you guys some good insight on what it's like to live in a day of a life of a CRNA. Keep in mind, again, as a CRNA, you can practice OB, which is labor and delivery. You can work your day in an endoscopy clinic. You can do a dental day. We're just doing all dental cases. You can do open heart, general cases of any kind, ortho, urology, OBGYN. I mean, anything under the sun. So really your day by day is going to vary, which I really enjoy. And it really allows you to kind of pick what you like, meaning if you really love working with kids and your hospital has kids, but maybe you don't like working with kids, equally so, you can say, I don't want any pediatric cases. I'd rather not do them. I mean, we had CRNAs who would literally say, I don't like this type of case. Now, don't get me wrong. You can't be real picky and choose to say, I'm not going to endoscopy ever. But a true specialty like pediatrics, open heart, OB, you could have some say as far as whether you actually want to do those or whether you don't want to do those. Some CRNAs would prefer not to do any of those specialties. And me personally, I always enjoyed getting that experience because I felt like it just made me more marketable, gave me better skills. And so when I knew my first job would probably never be my forever job, I knew that. And so I implored, the thought was, I'll just get as much experience as I possibly can get so I'm marketable, so I can get the best jobs. When I leave here, I will be a CRNA people want to hire because I have good experience. And really, that's actually served me incredibly well. So that's my recommendation. But again, do you do you. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you next week. All right, bye-bye. Hey, future CRNA, as always, I appreciate you and your loyalty. Thank you so very much for tuning in this week. I'd love to hear from you, so screenshot this episode and share it to your IG stories with your biggest takeaway. Don't forget to tag me at CRNA School Prep Academy so I can personally thank you. Be sure to head over to CRNASchoolPrepAcademy.com to check out our blog and gather free resources to help you along your CRNA journey. Stay strong, and I'll see you next week.